For the last few months, it's been a very frustrating time for Leave voters. We have seen the Cabinet steadily talk about transitional arrangements. We've seen the Labour Party completely shift its manifesto position and now saying we should stay in the customs union and the single market at least for the transitional period and perhaps actually ultimately forever. And we've been beginning to wonder, is there anyone out there speaking for the things that we voted for in that referendum? And I think that challenge has been very much on Theresa May's shoulders. I said a few weeks ago I felt that unless she stamped her authority on both the Brexit process and started to look to be in charge of the UK government, that I thought she'd be gone by Christmas. And then we get the announcement that she's going to give a major speech on Britain's future relationship with the EU. It'll happen in Florence this coming Friday. And okay, fine. I was sort of quite looking forward to it. It would be an update from her Lancaster House speech given earlier this year. Perhaps we get a real sense of direction. And perhaps the EU, who frankly have been treating us pretty badly, in my opinion, might get some sense that the Brits will stand up for themselves. And into all of this, I was amused on Friday morning to read a piece in the Telegraph by Fraser Nelson, the editor of The Spectator, where he said, "Where has Boris gone? Why is Boris in such total silence? We need to hear from him." Well, it didn't take very long, because the next day, Saturday, there was a 4,000-word piece in the Daily Telegraph from Boris Johnson, backed up by a lot of editorial comment and many other articles, cartoons, you name it. And this was very much Boris is back. It was Boris back saying many of the same things he said during the referendum campaign. We will leave the single market. We will leave the customs union. Not to do so, said Boris, would make a mockery of the referendum result. He didn't mention once transitional arrangements, giving the indication he doesn't really approve of them. He'd rather we just got on and did this. And he also said we should not pay for access to the single market any more than they should pay us for access to our market. So it was very much what I would call clean Brexit territory, what others would call hard Brexit territory. But either way, whichever you cut it, at least there was a vision. And around it, there was lots of positivity, lots of talk about we're a great country, how much better we're going to do post-Brexit, something I think that Leavers had been crying out for. Now, the question, though, is he also raised the £350 million a week. Do you remember that? It was emblazoned over his bus. He went round the country saying we should give £350 million a week to the National Health Service. And since the referendum, it's been used by the other side as being the great lie, because it wasn't right, it wasn't correct, it wasn't accurate. And indeed, many callers to LBC over the course of the last year have attributed it to me. Not guilty. I had nothing to do with it. In fact, I urged Boris's campaign not to use it. But that's by the by. And in the past, I thought, until in the middle of this article, Boris raises it himself again. He says, we will have this £350 million a week, and we can spend a lot of it on the National Health Service. Well, he's quite right. We couldn't spend all of it, because £350 million a week never actually went, because there is a giant, great big UK rebate. So you can argue about figures, but perhaps gross, something over £250 million a week goes. It's not £350. Anyway, he's raised that spectre again. It's an attempt by Boris, in my opinion, to justify what he did in the referendum campaign. I think he might have been wiser just to drop it, to leave it. But nonetheless, all of this has put the Prime Minister in a very interesting position. She's giving a major speech in Florence this Friday. Was Boris wrong to have put her in this position? And what should Theresa May do? Should she stand by the things that Boris has said in this article? Should she go for a clean Brexit, or is she going to stick where she was before on transitional arrangements? And either way, this starts to get, for the Conservative Party, a little complicated as their conference looms in a couple of weeks' time. Matthew from Heathrow, what do you make of Boris Johnson's piece, Matthew?
Oh, hi, Nigel. Basically, I think Boris Johnson is just playing politics. I mean, obviously, he's talking with Theresa May, and it's just a plan from the Conservatives that if the negotiations go wrong, that it's their plan B, that he's going to be the bad cop at the moment if they don't get the deal they want. And I'm sure Theresa May is going to announce going down the soft Brexit route. Well, I think he's the right route to do, and I think that's what everyone voted for in the last election.
Oh, no. We're not going to agree on that, but that's a separate debate. Matthew, so are you saying that Johnson has written this article and that he's not terribly sincere about it?
Well, I think it's what he feels, but basically it's just that, I mean, the Conservatives, they want to stay in power, obviously, and they just want to cover both angles. So at the moment, the negotiations haven't gone too well by the sounds of it, and he's the one playing bad cop, like
Matthew, I disagree. I disagree, Matthew, because actually we've not heard the pure Brexit voice from anybody in the Cabinet for a very, very long time. And I've been wondering, what on earth has happened to them? What do they put in the water at those Cabinet meetings? Why is everybody going along with the idea of a 3-year transition period, with the idea that we go on paying quite a lot of money during that period? Where is everybody? And I think what Boris has done, Matthew, is to help to re-energise the Leave debate. And it's noticeable that already Michael Gove and Priti Patel have come to his side. So, Matthew, I'm going to disagree with you. I'm going to say far from this being some sort of collusion with Theresa May. I think it risks quite a big split in the Tory cabinet coming up to their conference.
I think let's wait and see. I mean, we're going to see her announcement, and I think they just want to play it from both sides because they want to be in power. And let's hope that they don't just play politics and they do the right thing for the country. What I believe. What do you believe?
Different to what I believe. But no, Matthew, thank you. So Matthew thinks actually they're all working together. It's all about the Tory party boxing off both sides of the argument. I think he's wrong. The other question, of course, is this Boris Johnson being selfish? Is this Boris Johnson putting his own career above everything else, recognising that the Prime Minister has got a real problem? You know, we talked a week or so back about the fact that Lord Harris, the carpet tycoon, long-time Tory donor, had announced he was withdrawing support, and the fact that unless May gets a grip on this, she will, in my view, be gone by Christmas. I wonder what Charles, who's calling from Bagshot in Surrey, makes of Boris's piece.
Hi, Nigel. Firstly, great show. And before you write me off as a millennial snowflake, I support Trump. I'm a man-made global warming denier, or skeptic, as they say. But I think Boris Johnson is a deluded fool. And I think there's a lot of delusion on Brexit. I voted Remain for the economic reasons, not so much for the European Parliament. But I believe that there's going to be a huge price to pay, and there won't be any money, because my concern is we're going to have another bank bailout to protect them from Brexit, and my concern is the trade deals. We'll get them, but what sort of trade deals? Are we going to end up with India saying we have to have unlimited access to your labour market? I hope it works out, but I've got no respect for Boris Johnson. I just think he's a deluded fool.
So do you disagree with Boris because you disagree with the arguments for Brexit? Or do you think that Boris here has been selfish and is playing politics in his own interest?
Oh, he's like any other politician. He's doing it in his self-interest, I guess. But actually, I would respect it if you were the Tory leader.
Right. Well, there's not much chance of that.
Nigel. I do respect you, Nigel, in the fact that at least you've stuck with this for years. You've never changed.
No.
Your principles here.
No, I haven't, Charles. And I have to say, there are probably a lot of Remain voters like you who thought there was an economic case that it was safer that we should stay inside the European Union. It was kind of the status quo argument. But I think, Charles, I'm going to ask you something. It's slightly off script. But, I was there. I heard Mr. Juncker on Wednesday this week, talk about one powerful president, a finance minister that intervenes, every country joining the euro, a European army, a foreign policy, a United States of Europe. I mean, would you want us to have a second referendum and consider rejoining that?
Yes, I would.
Okay.
The thing is, though, we're talking about sovereignty. We're part of, if we really want total independence, we've got to get out of the United Nations, we've got to get out of NATO, we've got to get out of...
No, we haven't, Charles. No, we haven't, Charles, because NATO's about us as sovereign nations cooperating together. Anyway, listen, Charles, thanks for your call. Interesting. Mark in Billericay. What does Theresa May need to do? Is she going to stand up on Friday in Florence and say Boris is right?
I think Boris, quite frankly, is jockeying for position for ready for the takeover.
Mm-hmm.
The bottom line is, I'm sorry, by the way, nice to talk to you, Nigel. I've been an admirer for many years.
It's very kind of you.
Really good. No problem. But the bottom line is that whatever monies are available, and I believe there will be monies available from Brexiting.
Yep.
Obviously, some form of money must be diverted to the National Health Service. There's no doubt about that.
I mean, that would be a very positive thing, Mark, wouldn't it? Be a very positive thing if the Prime Minister said, you know, we're leaving the European Union, we're going to save a lot of money, it's going to the health service. People would like that, wouldn't they?
Yeah, of course they would.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's not just NHS, it's probably other services as well, which are normally supplied, obviously, from public money.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is, as far as Boris is concerned, I don't think it's a collusion thing. I heard one of your speakers.
Yeah, nor do I.
They're just sort of, you know, he's putting forward his point of view. In thinking ahead, you know, you guys have got to think ahead all the time. And he's thinking ahead for what's going to be happening. And by Christmas, I reckon, you know, maybe early New Year before we see the demise of May. She made a big boo-boo. She's gone for an overall majority and come unstuck.
I'm not so sure, Mark.
Tory voter.
I'm not so sure, Mark, she can last till the new year, but we'll see. Mark from Billericay making his point. I tell you what, whether Boris did it in self-interest or not, I tell you one thing, as somebody who spent his life devoted to the Leave campaign, thank goodness somebody in government is speaking up for the things we campaign for and for what people voted on, and is being positive against this constant diet of negativity that I get from the BBC and elsewhere. Boris, reading that piece yesterday morning, did actually cheer me up a bit. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's 11:15. Boris Johnson breaks his silence. We all wondered what he was up to. He'd said nothing about Brexit, it seemed like, for months and months and months. And then, yesterday morning, in the Daily Telegraph, he puts a 4,000-word piece in which he says, of course we've got to leave the single market and the customs union. Not to do so would make a mockery of the referendum result. And he makes no mention of transitional arrangements at all, but makes clear we should not be paying, once we've left, for access to the single market any more than the Germans should be paying us for access to our market. So let's get the inside track on Boris breaking his silence, and we'll do that by going to Christopher Hope, the assistant editor and chief political correspondent for the Daily Telegraph. Chris, good morning.
Morning, Nigel. Morning.
Morning. So, has Boris Johnson done the Brexit debate and the Tory party a favour or not with this article?
Well, I think it's a favour. I think he's pitching his optimistic vision for life outside the European Union in all in the swelling rhetoric and the patriotic tone of that article that we ran yesterday in Telegraph. You might recognise in your own speeches, Nigel, where I've been to many of those. As you
Actually,
know.
Funny enough, the phraseology that Boris picked up in the referendum, I did recognise certain echoes of the past, yes.
And certainly, it was certainly written like a speech. I mean, he said things like, I stand before you today, etc., etc. So it was written as though it was a speech, but it became an article. But it was 4,000 words. And don't forget, imagine if you're at UKIP and you were leading it again, Nigel, and then you flagged up your big speech in a week's time, and then, you know, a rival to you gave his own speech a week before you.
Well, I would be.
You'd be quite cross, wouldn't you?
No, I wouldn't be cross, Chris. I'd be absolutely flaming mad. I would go I mean, I don't often lose my temper, but I would go bonkers if anybody else did this to me. So, I mean, you know, we waited a long time to know when the Prime Minister was going to break her silence effectively on it. We were told it was next Friday, and up pops Boris. Is all of this signalling major Tory party splits ahead of the conference?
It's certainly lit a bonfire under the conference. I mean, to be fair to Boris, I think that he felt frustrated that he wasn't part of a cabinet committee last Tuesday that met to discuss the speech. He was in Hurricane Irma doing his day job, which is being Foreign Secretary.
Yep.
He came back and thought, well, I need to do something about this. And I think he gave us that op-ed, which we ran in full because of its sheer scale and its importance. I think that people do him a disservice if they say it's all about leadership for him. I think he also he also believes in Brexit, which is not a bad thing for some people. I mean, he believes it, you believe in it.
Yes.
Others believe in it. He believes in Brexit. I think if you look at the kind of Remainer critics, they want to try and undermine Boris, and they do that by saying, well, it's all about leadership, implying he doesn't mean what he's saying, when of course he does. I think, of course, politics is all about power, and everything is viewed through a prism of leadership, and therefore you can't get away from that fact. But I think it's unfair to say it's purely about that.
And how does Theresa May respond this Friday?
Well, she's boxed inside it because the problem she's got now is that we'll be judging her speech on Friday against what Boris Johnson said.
Yep.
So anything less than a pledge on the NHS, etc. And he ran right across what they call the policy waterfront in Whitehall. He talked about tax reform, housing policy. He raised the prospect of banning foreign ownership of homes in Britain, which is amazing. Yep. All sorts of areas nowhere near his policy area. And Amber Rudd this morning described it as backseat driving. Well, it certainly was. I mean, I think that, of course, the rival for leadership is Amber Rudd, don't forget.
Yeah, I'm sure that's right. Well, Chris, all I can say from Theresa May's perspective is with friends like Boris, who needs enemies? And thank you very much indeed for joining us. Chris Hope there from the Daily Telegraph. They broke the big Boris story. As he says, it was written. It was 4,000 words, and newspapers rarely publish stuff that is more than 1,500 words, perhaps 2,000 sometimes. And it was very much done in the form of a speech. And given that we know Theresa May is due to give a big speech on Friday, it does look like he was trying to usurp the Prime Minister, which may not be good for the Tory party, but for the Brexit argument, at least we were hearing the arguments that we heard during the campaign, which have been absent. And I think much of the frustration of Leavers out there is the Remainers are still campaigning every single day. Many of the Leavers, particularly those in the Cabinet, appeared to have shut up shop. Michael from Brentwood, would Boris be a good Prime Minister, Michael?
Hi, Nigel. Hope you're well.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'm not sure. I think that is a question. Like, I genuinely thought Theresa May at the time was the best option. Soon in, I decided to sort of change my mind on that. So I think it's very hard. It's probably one of those sort of things, like an England manager role. You don't know. It'll make or break you what's sort of there.
Sure.
However, getting there, I think that after the way he sort of, what he did with Gove after the leave, and I'll also point out that I did vote leave myself, and I'm disappointed it's not been a push for a harder Brexit. So, this speech does at least start to put those arguments out there again, Michael, doesn't it? Yeah, exactly. So I'm pleased about that. I quite like the prominence of Jacob Rees-Mogg. I'd love him to have a ministerial position. I'd actually love him to be Prime Minister. But, because he makes sense. He sort of commands the room's respect, and he actually breaks down on any sort of unfeasible argument from Remain and actually points out hard whole facts. In fact,
the one thing I
can't argue with them.
One thing I've picked up, Michael, this morning is that in 48 hours at the Tory party conference, Jacob Rees-Mogg already has 9 speeches booked. So he is in for a very, very big conference. And I think, Michael, I'm beginning to think that what we're going to see at the Tory party conference this year is the referendum rerun all over again, but we won't be involved as members of the public, but it'll be the Tory delegates in that room refighting Brexit. In fact, refighting the fight they've been having for nearly 50 years within that party. And so I think, there may be trouble ahead. Michael, finally, do you think Rees-Mogg is actually ready to be Prime Minister?
Again, very hard to tell, but I actually would say that he's probably the best of the situation.
Okay, fine.
And mainly because he fits the mould right now.
Right, fine. Michael from Brentwood, there we are, a Rees-Mogg supporter. I've no doubt you'll all start tweeting and texting now about Rees-Mogg. Nigel, Boris is on manoeuvres. Tory conference coming up, says Andrew. Nigel, maybe Boris should have thought about the NHS before wasting millions on the cable car, the Garden Bridge, said Donovan in North London. Boris has done us a favour. About time a British politician stood up for us. I get via Twitter. And I'm going to go to Andrew in the Docklands to ask him, Does he think Boris has helped the Brexit debate? And what kind of position has he put Theresa May in?
Hello, Nigel. Yes, it wasn't quite what I rang about, but I can have a stab at it.
Go on. What was it you were... Andrew, we're discussing Brexit, Boris, the Prime Minister. What was it you wanted to say?
Well, what I wanted to say was it was about the transitional arrangements, because for my mind, that just favours these huge corporates, which everybody in all sides doesn't seem to like, but no one ever seems to want to do anything about them. That 2 years from the Brexit letter is your time to organise your business, make arrangements so that you are in a fit and fighting position to leave the EU and to carry on in the big wide world after that. And everybody else has made their arrangements. I've made all my arrangements, and these people want another 3 years or something to get. That tells us that they're too bloated, too heavy, too cumbersome to make it in the big wide world, and they should be cut down to size by their competition.
Andrew, I have to say, the fact that the government decided to go for transitional arrangements for a further 3 years up until the next election, for which I guess we'd need to pay nearly 10 billion sterling every year. We'd probably keep free movement during that period as well. We'd be stuck inside the single market and customs union and banned from signing trade deals with any other part of the world. I couldn't believe that the whole cabinet appeared to be going along with it, and that's why I'm pleased. As I say, I don't really care about the health of the Tory party particularly, but it's why I'm pleased for the Brexit debate that Boris has said what he said, because he didn't mention transitional arrangements at all. And you're quite right, Article 50 was the transitional period. That was the 2-year period during which we were supposed to negotiate. Thank you. Hi, Nigel. Boris Johnson is like a lighthouse in the desert. A brilliant idea, but not much else, says Elle from Essex. Well, I tell you what, like Boris, loathe Boris. If you read that article, and as I say, it was designed to be a speech, the one thing Boris is superb at is being a wordsmith, and there was a lot of optimism that came out of that article. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 11:30. Boris writes a 4,000-word piece for the Daily Telegraph, and the Conservative Party are at each other's throats. Amber Rudd today, appearing on the Mar programme this morning, saying she did not want the direction of Brexit to be led by Boris Johnson, and Boris being very clear and saying single market no, customs union no. That'll make a mockery, absolute mockery of the referendum result. And he didn't talk about transitional arrangements, meaning perhaps, like our previous caller, Andrew from Docklands, he thinks the transitional arrangement was the 2-year Article 50 period, and not a further 3 years, and perhaps a further 30 billion sterling in contributions. So that's the big UK political story today. But let me tell you about something that's not a story today, which I'm really, really musing on, because over the course of the last month, we've talked, not just on my show, but the media as a whole have talked hugely about North Korea, about repeated missile tests, about some very strong words coming from Donald Trump and from the US administration warning Kim Jong-un that if he goes too far, he may face a military option. And commentators just a week ago, 10 days ago, saying, gosh, could we be on the verge of war? Is this the worst, most serious situation since the Cuban Missile Crisis, over 50 years ago? And yet, 2 days ago, another missile was launched. And yes, once again, it went over Japan, over Japanese territory for the second time in less than a month. It led to the air raid sirens going off in northern Japan and some of the islands, and people being told to go downstairs to cellars, bunkers, or whatever they may have. It was met by a statement from the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un, who said his country's final goal was to establish the equilibrium of real force with the United States and make the US rulers dare not talk about military options. So once again, he frightens Japan extraordinarily. He's upping the rhetoric. The Americans have put down their red lines. So the situation got a lot more serious over the last 48 hours. And if you go through today's newspapers, do you know what you'll find on it? Nothing. Virtually nothing. It is curious still to me, sometimes, what makes news and what doesn't. Well, one thing for certain is Boris Johnson has made news, and he'd been very quiet for a long, long time, but he's back in business, and along with the other comments, about the single market and everything else, he also rewarmed the 350 million a week, the controversial claim held up by everybody on the other side to have been the great lie of the referendum. And he said, no. We can use most of it to help the National Health Service. And I wonder what June in Lowestoft makes of that. June, good morning. Good morning, Nigel. I think Boris has just reiterated what was said in the referendum campaign. Out is out. That's what we voted for. Yes. He's being positive and clear. Yes. And 350 million can be used for lots of things. Now, I've got a little bit of a theory. I would use it for fishing, farming and border control. Not particularly all for the NHS, because the man and woman on the street, there's one thing they want. They want a job. But would you accept, June? If you've got a job, yes? June, just before we go on, would you accept that the reason this 350 million figure was so controversial and is constantly held up by the other side as being a lie, that's what they say, is that whilst 350 million a week in theory, should go to the European Union, it doesn't because of the UK rebate, and the real figure is probably nearly 100 million a week, less than that. So isn't it a mistake to say you can spend 350 million a week if it's not all physically going to Brussels in the first place? Well, that's a hard one. I mean, I don't really believe anything I hear and see. No, it's all right. You're not alone in that. With all that shingang, I mean, if you can't get your books... I mean, every year I could give my books to my accountant. That's all I'll say on that one. I mean, so, June, either way, are we, on leaving the European Union, is there money free? Money that we don't... Money that we give to the European Union that we don't get back in either rebates or any other form, yes. So you'd like to see it spent on a variety of things. But I would say to you, June, as you come from Lowestoft, I would say to you, we don't need to give any money to the fishing industry. All we need to do in Lowestoft is to give them 200 miles of the North Sea that they can call their own, and not a quota system. And I was out of Ramsgate the other day with a commercial fisherman whose quota of rays and skates that he can catch is so pitiful. He can catch a month's quota in a morning's work when the fish are running. So I would love to see, and I mean Lowestoft, which was, 25 years, 30 years ago, a thriving, active fishing port, literally destroyed by the Common Fisheries Policy. So I wouldn't give them any money, but I would give them a scrappage of this ridiculous quota system and waters in which to fish. I guess, June, there are arguments, and you were coming on to jobs, there are arguments about border force and everything else. I guess the point about giving a large sum of money to the NHS is that it will honour the commitment that many on the Leave side made. Yes, I totally agree with that. And obviously, of course, I want money to go to the NHS. That's paramount. But what I'm saying is, Nigel, a lot of the people I see around Lowestoft area, we're deprived, Great Yarmouth, around here, these lads and these girls, they want a job. And if they don't get a job, what they'll do, they'll get 20 quid, go down the road and go buy some pot or something like that and sit there, and then that causes mental health. I just think once you've got a job, you can get rid of mental health, obesity, drugs, gambling. And the strain isn't so much on the NHS and the police force. Years ago, we didn't have all these issues like we have now, because the majority, no matter whether you've got a university degree or you've got an O-level or GCA or you got nothing, which I didn't, you got a job. Yeah. And you had a few quid in your back pocket, Nigel, and that is what we want for this. Well, I guess the argument, June, could be that more money for the NHS could mean more nurses and more doctors, and so that, in a sense, would be jobs. But no, listen, June, great call. June makes the point the money could be used in lots of different ways to benefit lots of different people, and getting youngsters off the streets of Lowestoft is her key priority. Karen on Facebook says, on Boris, I don't trust any politicians. I even have doubts about Mog. Philip says, get May out. The sooner, the better. She might get herself out. If Christopher Hope's analysis, the Telegraph's assistant editor and chief political correspondent who was on this show half an hour ago, if Chris Hope's assessment is right, that what's actually happened here is the Prime Minister said, right, I'm giving this major speech on Friday in Florence. I'm going to stamp my authority on my own government, the Brexit process, and explain to them in Brussels what we will and won't put up with. And then a week before that, Boris Johnson publishes a 4,000-word, I was going to say peace stroke speech, but maybe I should be calling it a manifesto. Because he doesn't just talk about the European Union, he talks about a whole range of issues through housing and much else. So I do begin to think this is Boris's big pitch for the leadership. And I think as the Tory party conference approaches, I think it could be like watching, frankly, a boxing bout, because already you've got Amber Rudd and Boris Johnson lining up on completely different poles of the argument. And I think the Tory party are in for a really, really tough time coming up this year. Hi, Nigel. The only thing Boris is thinking about is his own ego. We all know he hankers for power, says Steve from Brum. If May said any money saved on Brexit would go to the NHS, everything would turn in her favour. Right, so she's in a hole, and what she does is she agrees with Boris that money should go to the NHS. But what does she do about transitional arrangements when it would appear that nearly all the cabinet, including David Davis, the chief negotiator, have accepted the principle of transitional arrangements? What if she says in Florence this week there will be an up to 3-year transition? And what if Boris comes back on the eve of the conference and says, no, that's not good enough, that'd cost another 30 billion sterling? I think they're headed for real problems. Could it be that Boris has been gagged for the conference and felt compelled to write instead, says Trini? I don't think Boris could ever be gagged. You can't gag Boris. It's impossible. If he wants to say or do something, he's always got a platform. You're listening to the Nigel Farage edition of The Sunday Show on LBC. It's 11:45. The blonde bombshell Boris Johnson has certainly gone and done it in yesterday's Daily Telegraph with a 4,000-word piece, which looked more like a speech, or many would say even a manifesto. Is he bidding to be the leader? Either way, he's got the Tory cabinet now fighting each other, and Theresa May, I suspect this Friday, fighting for her life. And I've been thinking during the break, Trini sent a text in that we read out before the break. Could it be that Boris has been gagged for the conference and felt compelled to write instead? And I said, Trini, don't be ridiculous. Boris can't be gagged. Well, Boris can't be gagged in the sense that he can, go on the news or write pieces or do whatever he wants. But I begin to wonder whether Trini might have a point. You see, Chris Hope earlier from the Telegraph made a point that there was a meeting that took place last Tuesday in which the Brexit strategy and the May speech in Florence was discussed. Boris wasn't in that meeting. He was doing, as Chris put it, his day job dealing with the hurricane. The implication from Chris Hope was that Boris felt slighted. And I wonder, Trini, whether he was told that what they wanted at conference was him to speak as Foreign Secretary about Hurricane Irma, about US relations, about North Korea, etc. And I wonder whether he was told, you can't give a Brexit speech because someone else is going to do that. And I wonder why that's whether he's written it in the Telegraph, in the style that he has. Is this the speech Boris wanted to give at conference but was told didn't fit into the party's agenda? I think, Trini, you may very well be on the money with that. Either way, the challenge is there, and I'm going to ask Paul in York, what on earth does Theresa May do this Friday? Because she's got Boris on one side, she's got Amber Rudd and the Chancellor and all the others on the other side. What does she do, Paul?
Well, first of all, I wanted Theresa May to succeed.
Yes.
Her maiden speech was very inspirational, and if you like, it was trying to join the country. But she's been promoted beyond her abilities. She's made too many errors. When she was Home Secretary, she promised to reform the police. Never did. Well,
we discussed that, Paul, between 10 and 11 this morning, and we've really got some pretty scathing criticism of her police cutbacks.
Well, not only that, I mean, for my money, it would be Boris Johnson, who likes the touch paper, but I'm hoping David Davis is the man who leads the country. Right,
so rather like Geoffrey Howe launching the attack on Margaret Thatcher, it wasn't Geoffrey Howe that was the successor, but do you think, Paul, that what Boris has done will launch a chain of events that will lead to the Prime Minister being removed?
I do. What I would say is I've never met David Davis, and you probably know him better than I, but he honestly said he was in support of the last general election. Now, to me, that were a brilliant move because it kept Nicola Sturgeon quiet from there on in. But can I just go off at a tangent? A little bit of a tangent.
Briefly, Paul, as lots of others want to, but go on.
All right, yeah. Yesterday I went to Harrogate Flower Show.
Yep.
And we had 2 policemen walking round with machine guns. It were packed. So if anything kicked off, there were going to be a lot of, if you like, victims. Whoever joins, whoever's selected, has got to bring this country back. And I believe David Davis is the only man that can do it.
Right. Well, I don't know whether David Davis can sort out Harrogate Flower Show, but what we do want is somebody to sort out Brexit, so we know where we're going. Paul, I thank you. Russell says we need strong leadership in the Tories until Brexit is over. If they play political leadership battles, then the opposition to Brexit will use it as an excuse to get another EU vote. Well, Russell, if the opposition wanted another EU vote, the one thing I'm very sure of after this week is it will not be a vote on us rejoining fully as members of the European Union. I think my friend Jean-Claude Juncker has completely put paid to that. But, it doesn't mean that the Labour Party could finish up at a position of saying we should be part, for example, of the European Economic Area, and that we should be part of a single market and the customs union, and that could happen. Theo says it's too unfair accusing Bojo of thinking of his political career by writing this article. I sense that may be just a little bit tongue in cheek. I wonder what Dan in Leicester makes of Boris's article. Good morning.
Good morning, sir. I thought that it was basically an attempt, or a successful attempt for Conservatives to start representing both ends of the argument again.
Okay.
So, as they did during the referendum, so whatever your position is on Brexit, the answer is the Tories. That's the tactic.
If UKIP, or someone like UKIP, at this moment in time, Dan, was in double digits in the polls and rising, I would buy that argument, but it's not the case, is it?
Well, no, because you've kind of been absorbed during the referendum. The Labour Party can't oppose a party that represents all angles. The UKIP has nowhere to go now because they're widely represented in the Conservative Party. The only real opposition are the Liberal Democrats, and they don't have any traction whatsoever currently. So the Tories, they play that card really well. Since Cameron announced the referendum, the Tories have kind of had to take this stance of representing all angles, and I think that's what Boris.
All right. So Dan, you think this is the Tory party being the big tent?
Yeah, exactly. It's that no one's talking about anything except which version of the Tory party is going to be victorious.
And do you think then, given that relations between Boris Johnson and Theresa May, I mean, do you think there'll be sort of tea at Chequers this afternoon between the two of them?
Well, Theresa's a trier, obviously. Boris, being born in the rarefied atmosphere he was born in, everything's a game. So he can't lose.
Dan, you may be right. There may be something incredibly clever that is going on here, and the Tory party getting support from different sides of the argument. You may be right. But generally, in politics, things happen for baser reasons, and personal slights, insults, ambitions generally are what dominate the political agenda more than plans and highfalutin ideas. Dan, you may be right, I doubt it, but you may well be right, and you're the second caller today. We had Matthew from Heathrow earlier making much the same point. I wonder what Barry in Chingford makes of it.
Well, I think I can't understand this import-export nonsense. I mean, the fact that we're in the EU means that when we export stuff, we don't charge VAT. Is that correct?
No. This is about tariffs, Barry. Tariffs.
Okay, or tariffs then.
Tariffs. I mean, the argument for it, ever since the common market 44 years ago, is that you can do business with your next door neighbours in Europe without anyone having to pay tariffs.
Exactly. But what they do, they pay VAT.
Yeah.
And that's taken care of the tariff. I can remember purchase tax.
Sure.
Where you simply pay the purchase. That was it. But the VAT, when we export to the EU, providing we can show the VAT number of the people that we're exporting to, we don't charge them VAT. So our country gets nothing out of my exports into the EU.
Well,
it's the EU that charges the VAT, that gives them their revenue.
Barry, what we get...
pays duty and tariffs.
Yeah, but Barry, don't forget, we import a lot more than we export with the European Union.
That's good, because we make money. Everything we import from the EU, we charge VAT on, and that goes into the coffers of the government.
Okay, Barry, all right, I understand that, but I don't think it's central to this argument. Look, let me ask you, do you think Theresa May's going to survive till Christmas?
I hope not.
You hope not, right. And were you a Leaver or a Remainer, Barry?
A Leaver.
You were a Leaver, right. So, but she's taken the Leave position, but she's obviously not impressed you. So, is this Boris's big pitch to be the PM?
I love Boris, you or Hogg. Mog, is it? Mog,
yes, Mog.
Of you to be PM, believe me.
Great.
The thing is, you guys have got charisma, and it's all about selling, and you're liven the bloody country up.
Barry from Chingford, we'll have to end it there. Very good, very, very amusing. Nigel, what are the Tory party doing, jetting off to Florence for their conference? What a waste of money. I thought we were scared. And no, the Tory party are not having their conference in Florence. The Prime Minister is giving a speech this week on Friday in Florence. I thought Boris was good until I saw his cycling scheme in London. Questionable judgment, says Neil. Yeah, well, certainly, if you go along Lower Thames Street, you can't move. We will see what happens. One thing for certain, the pressure now is absolutely heaped on Theresa May. What happens in Florence on Friday really matters. You've been listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. I'm back tomorrow evening from 7, coming up at 3, and new to the LBC schedule is Alex Salmond, but up next, it's Majid Nawaz.
Thank you, Nigel. Coming up, according to latest research, more than a quarter of England's secondary schools do not offer religious education, despite the law saying they must. Should schools be teaching religion? And if so, how? Before that, Aung San Suu Kyi was supposed to address the world from the podium of the UN this week at the General Assembly in New York. That was to clarify her stance, finally, on her country's ongoing ethnic cleansing. Instead, she was forced to cancel her plans by the army. What could happen if Myanmar's ethnic cleansing continues unabated? But first, Boris Johnson and Michael Gove have rekindled their Brexit partnership in a high-stakes attempt to force Theresa May's hand on EU talks. And that's as a new civil war erupted inside the Tory party. Did Bojo just regain his mojo?
On FM, online, on your mobile and on digital radio. Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at midday, a second man has been arrested by detectives investigating Friday's terrorist attack on a tube train at Parsons Green Station. The 21-year-old was detained in Hounslow in West London overnight. It follows the arrest of an 18-year-old in Dover and a raid by anti-terror officers on a house at Sunbury in Thames in Surrey yesterday. All but one of those injured on Friday have been